The courtroom was frozen in silence. Every eye locked onto the black teenager standing before the judge. She was calm, eerily so, while the weight of ridicule still lingered in the air. Moments ago, they had mocked her, laughed at her. Now they were speechless. Judge Patterson, infamous for his sharp tongue and belittling demeanor, had spent the last 20 minutes tearing into her. His words dripped with condescension. "You think you can fool this court?" He sneered, his laughter slicing through the tension. "A child playing attorney? This is a courtroom, young lady, not some school play." Then she spoke. Her voice was like a blade, precise and unwavering. With terrifying efficiency, she dismantled the prosecution's case, line by line. Legal precedents rolled off her tongue effortlessly. Every argument was airtight. Gas rippled through the crowd. This was no ordinary defendant. Judge Patterson's smirk faded. His fingers drummed against the bench, his confidence wavering. "I object," one of the prosecutors blurted, his face burning with frustration. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe this. This individual is not who she claims to be." The teenager turned her piercing gaze toward him. Then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, a knowing one. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "I can provide my credentials if necessary, but every word I've spoken is legally sound. Now shall we continue?" Judge Patterson's face turned crimson. His voice cracked. Who are you?" Without a word, she reached into her satchel. The air was thick with anticipation as she pulled out a pristine document and handed it to the bailiff. The paper was passed up to the judge. His hands trembled as he read it. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The courtroom held its breath. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The story started in the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where 17-year-old Maya Brooks lived with her grandmother Clara. Maya was no ordinary teenager. She had been a child prodigy, reading law books for fun by the age of 7 and debating college students by 12. Despite her brilliance, she chose to keep a low profile, uninterested in the attention that came with her intelligence. Her grandmother, a retired school teacher, often reminded her of the importance of humility and using her gifts for good one day, while helping her grandmother with groceries. Maya overheard a conversation at the corner store. A local single mother, Teresa, was in tears explaining to the cashier that her landlord was evicting her and her 2 young children. "I don't have anywhere to go," Teresa sobbed. "I've paid every cent on time, but he says I violated the lease. I didn't. I swear I didn't." Ma's heart sank. She approached Teresa after the conversation and asked her what happened. Teresa explained that her landlord claimed she had too many people living in the apartment. "It's just me and my babies." Teresa insisted Hen's lying because he wants to raise the rent for someone else. Maya's mind raced. She asked Teresa if she had kept copies of her payments in the lease agreement. Teresa nodded and said she had everything stored in a folder at home. Maya felt a spark of determination. "Let me help you," she said firmly. "I think you have a case." Teresa looked at her in disbelief. "But you're just a kid." Maa smiled. "I've been told that before. Trust me." Over the next few days, Maya pored over Teresa's documents. The landlord's claims were riddled with inconsistencies. She decided to write a formal letter to the landlord, demanding that he cease the eviction and threatening legal action. If he didn't comply when the landlord ignored her, she helped Teresa file a case in small claims. Court words spread quickly through the neighborhood. The teenager who always had her nose in books was standing up for justice. The case caught the attention of local reporters, and Maya's involvement was the headline of every small-town news outlet. But not everyone was impressed. Some questioned her qualifications, and others mocked the idea of a teenager taking on such a serious matter. As the court date approached, Teresa became increasingly anxious. "What if we lose? I don't have money for a lawyer." Maya reassured her, but deep down she knew the stakes were high. This was not just about Teresa. It was about standing up to injustice and proving that age and skin color didn't determine capability on the day of the hearing. The courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters, and even some lawyers had come to watch the child attorney in action. Maya, dressed in a plain navy blazer and skirt, carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her years. But as soon as she stepped forward to speak, Judge Patterson interrupted her. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm representing the plaintiff, Your Honor," Maya replied calmly. The judge chuckled, shaking his head. You must be joking. Is this a prank? The room filled with whispers and stifled laughter. MAA stood firm, her expression unchanging, Judge. Patterson continued to ridicule her, questioning her credibility and making remarks about how kids these days didn't understand the seriousness of the law. Maya endured it all, silently waiting for her moment to speak when the opportunity finally came. She presented her case with precision and clarity, citing legal precedents and exposing the landlord's lies. The room grew quiet as she spoke her words, commanding attention and respect. But the moment that left everyone speechless was when she revealed her true identity. Maya Brooks, a certified legal prodigy who had passed the bar exam at just 16, something she had kept secret until now. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Judge Patterson's gavel slammed against the bench, and just as Maya stood tall, poised to deliver the final blow to the prosecution's flimsy arguments, the judge leaned forward, his face pale. This court is adjourned for a 10-minute recess. He stammered clearly, needing time to process what had just unfolded. Maya's eyes followed him as he retreated to his chambers, and a small smile crept across her face. This was only the beginning. The courtroom buzzed with chatter as the recess began. Spectators leaned toward one another, whispering about the teenage attorney who had just stunned the judge and prosecution alike. Some marveled at her. Poised others were skeptical, insisting that this had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. Maya remained seated at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly together despite her composed exterior. Her heart raced. She had revealed her credentials, a bold move, but it had come with risks. Now there was no turning back. Teresa leaned toward her, her voice barely audible over the noise. Maya, are you sure we're going to win this? They're acting like you're some kind of fraud. Maya turned to her, her voice steady. They're acting that way because they're afraid the truth is on our side. Teresa, trust me. Before Teresa could respond, the bath announced the judge's return. The room fell silent as Judge Patterson re-entered, his face an unreadable mask. He took his seat and cleared his throat. This court will now resume, he said, his voice firmer than before. His gaze shifted toward Maya, but the arrogance from earlier had vanished. Miss Brooks, the court acknowledges your credentials. You may proceed, but I advise you to tread carefully. You are still representing your client in a very serious matter. Maya stood and walked to the front of the courtroom, her every movement deliberate. She could feel the weight of the stairs on her back, but she blocked it out, focusing only on the task at hand. Your Honor, she began, I would like to submit additional evidence that further undermines the defense's claims. She approached the bench and handed the judge a stack of documents, copies of emails between Teresa and the landlord, all of which contradicted his claims about lease violations. Maya had highlighted key phrases in bright yellow, ensuring nothing could be missed. Judge Patterson studied the documents in silence, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. When he finally looked up, he turned to the landlord's attorney. Mr. Cole, the judge said, his voice sharp, these emails directly contradict your client's testimony. Do you have an explanation for this? The landlord's attorney, a middle-aged man with graying hair, hesitated. Your Honor, these emails could have been fabricated. We would need time to verify their authenticity. Maya didn't flinch. Your Honor, I anticipated that argument, she said, pulling out another sheet of paper. Here is the chain of custody for these emails, including metadata verification from a certified digital forensics expert. The courtroom erupted into murmurs again. Judge Patterson's gavel came down with a bang. Order. I said order. Maya returned to her seat, her confidence unshaken. The judge turned back to the landlord's attorney. Mr. Cole, unless you can provide concrete evidence to refute this, I will have no choice but to consider these emails valid. The defense attorney stumbled over his words, clearly caught off guard. Your Honor, we need additional time to review. Denied. The judge interrupted his tone. I see, we've already spent too much time on this matter. Miss Brooks, continue. Maya rose again, her voice unwavering as she outlined the timeline of events linking the landlord's actions to clear violations of housing laws. She brought up precedent after precedent, each one reinforcing Teresa's case. At one point, the landlord himself, a burly man with a sour expression, leaned over to whisper furiously to his attorney. Maya noticed but didn't let it distract her. Instead, she pressed on, her arguments growing more persuasive with each passing minute. But then something unexpected happened as Maya began summarizing her final points. The landlord abruptly stood up, his face red with anger. "She's lying," he shouted, pointing at Maya. "This whole thing is a setup. There's no way a kid like her knows all this legal stuff." The courtroom erupted into chaos once again. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel repeatedly, his voice booming over the noise. "Order in the court, sit down, Mr. Reynolds, or I will hold you in contempt." The landlord reluctantly sat, his chest heaving with fury. Maya took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. Despite the outburst, "Your Honor," she said calmly, "if Mr. Reynolds has any evidence to support his accusations, I invite him to present it. Otherwise, I request that the court focus on the facts." The judge nodded, his expression stern. "Mr. Reynolds, you will remain silent unless called upon to speak, Miss Brooks. You may continue." Maya finished her presentation, her closing remarks delivered with the precision and authority of someone twice her age. When she finally sat down, a wave of relief washed over her. But she knew the battle wasn't over yet. The defense attorney called his next witness, a maintenance worker from the apartment complex who claimed to have seen multiple people entering and leaving Teresa's unit. Maya listened carefully, jotting down notes as the man spoke when it was her turn to cross-examine. She approached the witness stand with a calm, measured strike. "Cried Mr. Davis?" She began. "You testified that you saw multiple people entering and leaving Miss Carter's apartment. Can you specify how many people?" And when this occurred, the man hesitated. Maybe 4 or 5 people. And it was a couple of months ago." Maya nodded. "A couple of months ago. Do you remember the exact dates?" "No, not exactly," he admitted. "Did you report this to anyone at the time?" "Well, no," the man said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "It didn't seem like a big deal." Then Maya's lips curved into a faint smile. "So to clarify, you're unable to provide specific dates or evidence to support your claim? Is that correct?" The man frowned but nodded. "Yeah, I guess so. Thank you, Mr. Davis," Maya said, stepping away from the stand. As she returned to her seat, she glanced at Teresa, who gave her a nervous but grateful smile. The rest of the day's proceedings were uneventful compared to the earlier drama, but tension hung thick in the air. As the court adjourned for the day outside, reporters swarmed Maya and Teresa, shouting questions and snapping photos. Maya shielded Teresa as best she could, guiding her through the crowd back at home. Maya collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Clara placed a cup of tea in front of her and sat down. "You were incredible today," her grandmother said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Maya managed a tired smile. "Thanks, Grandma, but it's not over yet. Tomorrow's going to be even tougher." Clara reached out and squeezed her hand. "You've got this, Maya. Just remember why you're doing it." Maya nodded, determination flickering in her eyes for people like Teresa, for everyone who's been told they're not enough. The next morning, Maya arrived at the courthouse early, ready to face whatever came next. But as she walked through the doors, she was greeted by a sight she hadn't anticipated. 2 police officers standing near the entrance, speaking with the landlord. One of the officers spotted Maya and began walking toward her, a grim expression on his face. "Miss Brooks," he said, "we need to talk." Maya froze for a moment, her mind racing. She scanned the officer's expression, searching for any hint of what this confrontation might be about. Teresa, who had been walking a few steps behind her, caught up and immediately sensed the tension. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady. The officer glanced at the landlord, who was smirking smugly from across the lobby. "We've received a report from Mr. Reynolds," the officer said, "HEK, alleging that you falsified evidence." In this case, Teresa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Maya's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "That's a serious accusation," she said. "What evidence does he have to support it?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We're not here to determine that, we're just doing our due diligence. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." The smug look on the landlord's face grew wider. Maya met his gaze, her expression unflinching. "I understand," she said to the officer, "but I'd like to speak with my client and legal counsel before I go anywhere." The officer hesitated but nodded. "Fine, don't take too long." Maya turned to Teresa and spoke in a low voice. "This is a scare tactic. He's trying to rattle us, because he knows his case is falling apart." "But what if they arrest you?" Teresa whispered, panic rising in her voice. "What if they won't," Maya said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong and they have no proof. Otherwise, stay calm and don't say anything to the landlord or his attorney." Teresa nodded reluctantly. Maya then stepped aside and called her grandmother. Clara answered on the first ring. Maya is everything. Okay, Grandma. I need you to contact Mr. Harris, Maya said, referring to a family friend who was a retired attorney. The landlord just made a false accusation against me, and the police want to question me. Clara's voice hardened. Stay strong, sweetheart. I'll get in touch with him right away, don't. Let them intimidate you. I won't, Maya promised before ending the call. She turned back to the officer who was waiting nearby. I'm ready, she said, but I want to make it clear that I've done nothing illegal. This is an attempt to intimidate me. The officer nodded but didn't respond as they walked toward the station. Maya kept her head high, refusing to give the landlord the satisfaction of seeing her falter at the police station. Maya was taken to a small interrogation room. It was bare except for a metal table and two chairs. One of the officers who had escorted her and sat down across from her, placing a tape recorder on the table. Miss Brooks, the officer began, you're not under arrest, but we need to ask you some questions about the evidence you submitted in court. Mr. Reynolds claims that it was fabricated. Maya folded her hands on the table, her expression calm. The evidence I submitted is authentic. I have documentation to prove its validity, including a chain of custody report from a certified digital forensics expert. The officer frowned slightly. Do you have those documents with you? They're in my case file, which is back in the courtroom. Maya replied, you're welcome to review them. The officer hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. Why would Mr. Reynolds make these accusations if they weren't true? Because he's desperate, Maya said bluntly. His case is falling apart, and he knows it. This is his way of trying to discredit me and delay the proceedings. The officer studied her for a moment, then stood up. Wait here. Maya exhaled slowly as the officer left the room. Despite her composed exterior, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. What if this derailed the case? What if they believed the landlord's lies? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The officer returned, followed by Mr. Harris, the family friend and retired attorney Clara had contacted. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a confident stride. He gave Maya a reassuring nod before addressing the office. I'm here as Miss Brooks' legal counsel. Mr. Harris said, what exactly is the basis for this questioning? The officer explained the landlord's accusations, but as Mr. Harris listened, his expression didn't waver. When the officer finished, Mr. Harris leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. This is a baseless claim. He said if Mr. Reynolds has evidence to support these allegations, let him present it, otherwise you're detaining my client without cause. The officer shifted uncomfortably. We're not detaining her. Then she's free to go. Mr. Harris interrupted. Unless you're planning to arrest her. This conversation is over. The officer hesitated but finally nodded. Shaq free to go, but we'll be following up on this. Maya stood, her confidence returning. I'll be happy to cooperate within the bounds of the law, she said, as they left the station. Mr. Harris placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You handled yourself well, he said. But be careful, this landlord is playing dirty. Maya nodded. I expected as much. Thank you for coming. Anytime, Mr. Harris replied. Now go win that case. When Maya returned to the courthouse, Teresa ran to her, relief evident on her face. Are you okay? What happened? They let me go. Maya said they didn't have anything to hold me on. Teresa sighed in relief, but the tension lingered in her eyes. What do we do now? We stick to the plan, Maya said firmly. This is just another obstacle. We'll get through it. The hearing resumed that afternoon, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was noticeably different. The landlord sat with a smug expression, clearly expecting the police encounter to have rattled Maya. But as she stood to continue her argument, it was as if nothing had happened. Maya methodically picked apart the landlord's remaining defenses, presenting evidence, and calling witnesses who testified to his history of exploiting tenants. The tension in the room grew with each passing minute, and by the end of the day, the landlord's confidence had begun to crack. But just as Maya felt they were gaining ground, another twist threw everything into chaos as the court prepared to adjourn. The landlord's attorney stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we've just received new evidence that we believe will change the course of this case. We request an emergency motion to introduce it tomorrow. The judge frowned. What kind of evidence? The attorney hesitated, clearly trying to make it sound more dramatic than it was. Financial records that suggest Miss Carter has been withholding information about her income. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Ma's heart sank as she glanced at Teresa, who looked utterly confused. The judge banged his gavel for silence. WEC review the motion tomorrow, Judge Patterson said, Court is a jour for the day. As Maya packed up her files, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her chest if the landlord's team had fabricated evidence. It could derail everything. She turned to Teresa, who was pale and trembling. I don't understand. Teresa whispered, what financial records? I don't have anything to hide. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. But as they walked out of the courthouse, Maya couldn't ignore the nonsense that the battle was about to get even tougher. And this time, the stakes felt higher than ever. That night, Maya stayed up late in her room, combing through every document, email, and note related to the case. She knew the landlord's team was pulling every trick in the book, but she needed to anticipate their next move. The mention of financial records didn't make sense. Teresa had been transparent about her income, and Maya had reviewed her bank statements herself. Ma's laptop screen glowed faintly in the dim room as she typed out possible arguments and strategies. Her grandmother, Clara, poked her head in, her expression soft with concern. You need rest, sweetheart, Clara said gently. You can't fight this battle if you're running on fumes. I know, Grandma, Maya replied. Not looking up, but I need to figure out what they're planning. I can't let them blindside us tomorrow. Clara walked in and placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. You've done everything you can tonight. Trust yourself and trust that the truth will come out. Maya sighed, nodding reluctantly. You're right, she said, shutting her laptop. I'll get some sleep. But as she lay in bed, her mind refused to quiet. What kind of evidence could they possibly have, and how far were they willing to go to discredit Teresa? The next morning, the courtroom was packed again. Word had spread about the landlord's last-minute motion, and everyone was eager to see what would happen next. Maya and Teresa sat at the plaintiff's table, both trying to appear calm. Despite the tension in the air, Judge Patterson entered his face. As stern as ever, this court is now in session. He announced, Mr. Cole, you may proceed with your motion, the landlord's attorney. Mr. Cole stood and approached the bench, carrying a thick folder. Your Honor, these are financial records that suggest Miss Carter has been receiving income from undisclosed sources. We believe this information is relevant to the case as it pertains to her ability to pay rent and the claims of financial hardship she has made. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Patterson flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. Miss Brooks, the judge said, looking up. Have you had an opportunity to review this evidence? Maya stood. No, Your Honor, this is the first time I'm seeing it. I would request time to review these documents and verify their authenticity. Mr. Cole immediately objected, Your Honor. The evidence is straightforward and should be admitted immediately. Any delay would unfairly disadvantage my client. Maya stepped forward, Your Honor. This evidence was presented at the 11th hour, with no prior notice given the seriousness of these allegations. It's only fair that we be allowed time to examine it thoroughly. The judge considered this for a moment before nodding. Miss Brooks is correct. The plaintiff will have until tomorrow morning to review this evidence. Court is adjourned for the day. As soon as the hearing ended, Maya and Teresa hurried out of the courtroom and found a quiet corner to go through the documents. Maya's heart sank as she flipped through the pages. The records included bank statements and payment logs that seemed to suggest Teresa had been receiving large sums of money from an unknown source. I don't understand, Teresa said, her voice shaking. I've never seen these before, for they're not mine. Maya studied the documents closely, her analytical mind racing. These look official, but something feels off. I'm going to dig deeper. She pulled out her laptop and started cross-referencing the account numbers and transaction details. After an hour of painstaking research, she found the first clue. Look at this, Maya said, pointing to the screen. The account these payments are coming from belongs to a company called Harmony Solutions. Have you ever heard of them? Teresa shook her head. No, what do they do? I'm not sure yet, Maya said, typing furiously. But I'm going to find out. Her search revealed that Harmony Solutions was a shell company with no real business operations. Its listed address was a P.O. box in a distant state, and its website was a single page with vague descriptions of consulting services. Maya's gut told her this company was a front, but she needed proof. Teresa, this could be our smoking gun. Maya said, if we can link Harmony Solutions to Mr. Reynolds, we can prove that these records were fabricated. But how do we do that? Teresa asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Maya leaned back, her mind racing. We'll need help. I'm going to call someone I trust that evening. Maya met with Aaron, a tech-savvy friend from her neighborhood who had helped her with research in the past. Aaron was a college student majoring in cybersecurity, and he loved a good challenge. Fabricated financial records, Aaron said, raising an eyebrow. That's shady, but if there's a digital trail, I'll find it. Maya handed him the documents and explained what she had discovered so far. On's fingers flew across his keyboard as he began digging into Harmony Solutions after an hour of silence. He leaned back with a triumphant grin. Got it. Harmony Solutions is registered under a holding company that's owned by, wait for it, your landlord, Mr. Reynolds. Maya's jaw tightened. So he's behind this. He created fake records to frame Teresa. Looks like it, Aaron said. And I've got the digital breadcrumbs to prove it. These transactions were fabricated using a template software. Amateur move. Maya smiled for the first time all day. Aaron, you're a lifesaver, just doing my part, he said with a shrew. I'll send you everything you need. But be careful, guys. Like this, don't play fair the next morning. Maya walked into the courtroom with a renewed sense of determination. She had spent the night organizing Aaron's findings into a comprehensive presentation, and she was ready to dismantle the landlord's latest scheme when the hearing resumed. Mr. Cole confidently presented the financial records to the court, reiterating his claim that Teresa had been hiding income. Judge Patterson turned to MAA. Miss Brooks, are you ready to respond? Maya stood her voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to present evidence that these financial records are fraudulent and were fabricated by Mr. Reynolds to discredit my client. Gas filled the room as Maya walked to the front and began her presentation. She explained the connection between Harmony Solutions and Mr. Reynolds, detailing how the company had been used to create fake transactions. She handed over copies of Aaron's findings, which included screenshots, metadata, and a step-by-step explanation of the process. By the time she finished, the landlord's smug expression had vanished. He whispered furiously to his attorney, who looked pale and flustered. Judge Patterson studied the evidence for several long moments before addressing the landlord directly. Mr. Reynolds, do you have any explanation for this? The landlord stammered, his face turning red. I didn't do anything. This is a setup. The judge's expression hardened. The evidence says otherwise. I am deeply disturbed by these actions, which appear to be an attempt to manipulate this court. I will be referring this matter for further investigation. Maya returned to her seat, her heart pounding. She had won this round, but she knew the battle wasn't over as the judge adjourned for the day. She glanced at Teresa, who looked at her with tears of gratitude in her eyes. But just as they began packing up their things, Mr. Cole stood and made an announcement that sent a chill down Maya's spine. Your Honor, in light of these allegations, my client intends to countersue for defamation. We be filing the paperwork immediately. The announcement hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, a countersuit. Maya's mind raced. She knew this was another ploy by the landlord to intimidate and exhaust Teresa into submission, but it added a new layer of complexity to an already grueling fight. Judge Patterson raised a skeptical brow at Mr. Cole. You went to countersue for defamation after being implicated in the fabrication of evidence. This court will require compelling proof to even entertain such a claim. Mr. Cole straightened his tie, his expression smug. Your Honor will provide that proof. The accusations against my client are baseless, and we believe this case has unfairly damaged his reputation. The judge exhaled heavily. Clearly displeased, you may file your motion. But be advised, this court will not tolerate frivolous litigation. Proceed at your own risk. The gavel came down, adjourning the session for the day. As the courtroom emptied, Maya remained seated, her thoughts churning. Teresa sat beside her, visibly shaken. Maya. Teresa whispered, what does this mean? Can he really do this? Maya turned to her, her eyes filled with determination. He's bluffing, Teresa. He knows his case is weak, so he's trying to scare us into backing down. But we're not going anywhere that evening. Maya gathered her team, Teresa, her grandmother Clara, and Aaron, for an emergency strategy session at her home. Clara had made tea for everyone, and the aroma filled the small living room as Maya laid out her plan. This countersuit is a distraction, Maya began, but we can't ignore it. If we let it gain traction, it could muddy the waters and make it harder for the judge to see the truth. Aaron leaned forward. I've been digging into Reynolds' financial records. The guy's got skeletons in his closet. Maya, I found transactions tied to other shell companies, and it looks like he's been using them to dodge taxes and funnel money. Clara's eyes widened. That's serious. Could it help your case? It could, Maya said, but we need to tread carefully. If we bring it up, we'll need solid proof and a strategy to tie it back to the case. Teresa looked overwhelmed. This is so much, I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to protect my kids and keep our home. Maya placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know, Teresa, and that's exactly what we're going to do. No matter how dirty they play, we're not back. Ing down the next day, Maya walked into the courtroom, prepared for another battle true to his word. Mr. Cole had filed the countersuit claiming that Teresa's accusations had caused Mr. Reynolds severe emotional distress and irreparable harm to his reputation. Judge Patterson reviewed the motion with a skeptical eye. Mr. Cole, your motion makes bold. Claims, do you have evidence to support these allegations? Mr. Cole nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We intend to call witnesses who can testify to the damage these baseless accusations have caused my client. Maya Saint, Your Honor, we believe this countersuit is an attempt to distract from the real issue, Mr. Reynolds' misconduct. We request the opportunity to depose Mr. Reynolds and his witnesses before this motion proceeds further. The judge considered this for a moment. Very well. Depositions will be scheduled before we move forward. Court is adjourned a week later. Maya sat in a small conference room facing Mr. Reynolds and his attorney. The deposition was tense from the start. Mr. Cole tried to deflect questions and steer the conversation away from incriminating topics. But Maya was relentless. Mr. Reynolds. She said, her tone sharp. Can you explain why payments from Harmony Solutions are tied to your personal bank account? Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. That's none of your business. It's directly relevant to this case. May oppressed Harmony Solutions, fabricated financial records to frame my client. Are you denying your connection to this company? Reynolds glared at her. I don't have to answer that. Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. You do, if you want this court to believe your countersuit has. Merritt, Reynolds' attorney, quickly interrupted objection. These questions are irrelevant to the countersuit. Maya turned to him unflinching. They're entirely relevant given the allegations against my client. If you want to talk about defamation, let's discuss the damage caused by Mr. Reynolds. False accusations, the tension in the room was palpable. Reynolds' attorney shifted tactics, redirecting the conversation back to the countersuit. But the cracks in their case were already showing. As the days passed, Maya's team uncovered even more damning evidence against Mr. Reynolds. Aaron's investigation revealed that Harmony Solutions wasn't the only shell company he controlled. Several others were linked to fraudulent schemes targeting low-income tenants. Armed with this information, Maya prepared to present her findings to the court. But as the hearing approached, the pressure began to take its toll. Reporters hounded Maya and twisting the story into sensational headlines. Social media was abuzz with debates over the case, and Maya found herself the target of both admiration and criticism. One evening, as she worked late in her grandmother's living room, Clara sat down beside her. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders, Maya, Clara said softly. You don't have to do this alone, Maya, sighed, her exhaustion showing. I just want to do what's right, Grandma, but sometimes it feels like the whole world is against us. Clara smiled gently. The truth has a way of shining through, no matter how dark things seem. Just keep going, one step at a time. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric. Maya presented her findings with precision, tying Mr. Reynolds' web of shell companies to a pattern of fraud and abuse. She outlined how he had used these schemes to intimidate tenants and silence critics. Judge Patterson listened intently, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Maya finished, the courtroom was silent. Mr. Cole, the judge said, turning to the landlord's attorney, do you have any response to these allegations? Cole stammered clearly. Caught off guard, Your Honor. We believe these claims are unrelated to the countersuit. The judge cut him off. Unrelated. They speak directly to your client. Credibility and pattern of behavior. This court will not proceed with the countersuit until these allegations are full investigated. Maya felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived as the judge prepared to adjourn. A commotion erupted in the back of the courtroom. Two men in suits entered, flashing badges. Your Honor, one of them said, we federal investigators, we've been conducting an investigation into Mr. Reynolds, and we have a warrant for his arrest. Gasps filled the courtroom as the officers approached the landlord, who turned pale. This is a mistake, he shouted as they handcuffed him. You can't do this. Maya watched, her heart pounding. This was a victory, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over yet. The courtroom was in chaos as the federal agents led Mr. Reynolds away. In handcuffs, his protests echoed through the room, but the crowd's murmurs quickly drowned him out. Maya sat frozen in her seat, her mind reeling. She hadn't anticipated the landlord's arrest, but she knew this could dramatically shift the case. Judge Patterson banged his gavel, demanding order. This court will reconvene tomorrow to determine how to proceed. he announced before a Jew. The session, Teresa turned to Maya, her voice trembling. Does this mean it's over? Is he going to jail? Maya shook her head. It's a big development, but it doesn't automatically end the case. We need to see how this plays out later that evening. Maya sat with Aaron and Clara in the kitchen, poring over the day events. Aaron had been following the news online, where articles about Reynolds' arrest were spreading like wildfire. Looks like the feds have been investigating him for years, Aaron said, scrolling through his laptop. Tax fraud, wire fraud, tenant exploitation. You name it, this guy's been running schemes across the state. Clara leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. It's no wonder he was so desperate to silence Teresa. Exposing this case probably tipped the scales for the investigators. Maya nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. We need to prepare for tomorrow. Reynolds may be out of the picture for now, but his attorney will likely try to push the countersuit forward. Aaron frowned. Even without Reynolds, they're still trying to fight. Possibly, Maya said, but the judge knows the truth is on our side. We just have to make sure we stay ahead of them the next morning. The courtroom was quieter than usual. The absence of Mr. Reynolds was palpable, but Mr. Cole, his attorney, was present, looking more haggard than ever. Maya and Teresa took their seats, bracing for whatever came next. Judge Patterson entered and addressed the room. Before we proceed, I want to address the recent developments. The arrest of Mr. Reynolds raises serious questions about the integrity of this case and the countersuit. However, this court still has a duty to evaluate all evidence before reaching a decision. Mr. Cole stood his voice, waiving Your Honor while my client is unavailable. I believe the countersuit should proceed based on the merits of our claims. MAA stood in response, Your Honor, the countersuit has no merit. The fabricated evidence, Mr. Reynolds' arrest, and his established history of misconduct undermine any credibility the defense might have. The judge nodded slowly. Ms. Brooks makes a strong argument. However, I will allow the defense to present their case before issuing a ruling. Mr. Cole, you may proceed. Mr. Cole called his first witness, a tenant from another property owned by Mr. Reynolds. The man claimed that Reynolds had always been kind and fair, insisting that the accusations against him were misunderstandings. Maya listened carefully, taking notes when it was her turn to cross-examine. She approached the stand with confidence. Mr. Davis, she began, you've testified that Mr. Reynolds was a fair landlord. Can you confirm if you've ever had any disputes with him? The man hesitated. No, not personally. Have you ever been threatened with eviction or faced unexpected rent increases? Well, no, he admitted. Are you aware that Mr. Reynolds owns multiple properties under different business names? May pressed, the witness shifted uncomfortably. I've heard rumors. Maya smiled faintly. Rumors can be telling, can't they? No further questions, Your Honor. As the day wore on, the defense's case began to crumble. Their witnesses offered little more than vague praise for Reynolds, and none could refute the mounting evidence against him. By the afternoon, it was clear that Mr. Cole was running out of strategies when it was Maya's turn to make her final argument. She stood with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. Your Honor, she began, this case is about more than just my client. It's about standing up to those who abuse their power to exploit others. Mr. Reynolds' arrest and the evidence we've presented leave no doubt about his actions. This countersuit is a desperate attempt to deflect blame, and it has no basis in truth. She turned to Teresa, who sat nervously at the plaintiff's table. Miss Carter's a hardworking mother who has done nothing wrong. She deserves justice, and this court has the power to deliver it. As Maya returned to her seat, she caught a glimpse of Mr. Cole. His shoulders were lumped, and he avoided her gaze. The judge took a long moment to review his notes before addressing the court, based on the evidence presented. It is clear that the countersuit lacks merit. This court dismisses the countersuit with prejudice and will proceed with the original case. A wave of relief washed over Maya and Teresa. The countersuit was officially dead, and the path to victory seemed clearer than ever. But just as the courtroom began to empty, a baith approached Maya with a sealed envelope. This was just delivered for you, he said. Maya opened it carefully, her heart pounding as she read the contents. It was a subpoena. Reynolds' legal team had filed a motion to introduce new evidence, and the hearing was set for the next day. Her relief was short-lived. The fight was far from over. Ma's heart sank as she read. The subpoena, new evidence, she muttered, her mind already racing with questions. What could Reynolds' team possibly have left to present? And how could they have managed it with Reynolds behind bars? Teresa, who had been In the judge's dismissal of the countersuit, noticed Maya's expression shift. "What is it?" she asked nervously. Maya handed her the document. "They're filing a motion to introduce new evidence. We have a hearing tomorrow." Teresa's face piled new evidence. "What else can they throw at us?" Maya put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever it is, we'll be ready. This is just another desperate attempt to stall." That evening, Maya returned home and immediately called Aaron. She explained the situation, and he was just as baffled as she was. "New evidence? That's a bold move considering the mess they're in," Aaron said, typing furiously on his laptop. "They've got to be banking on something big or they're bluffing either way." "We can't take chances," Maya replied. "I need you to dig deeper into Reynolds' legal team, see if they've been working with anyone new, especially since his arrest." "I'm on it," Aaron said. "I'll let you know what I find the next morning." Maya walked into the courtroom with her head held high, even as uncertainty gnawed at her. Teresa sat beside her, clutching her hands tightly in her lap. The room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters and spectators eager to see what this latest twist would bring. Judge Patterson entered, his face unreadable. "This court is now in session. Mr. Cole, you've requested to introduce new evidence. Please explain its relevance." Mr. Cole stood holding a manila folder. His confidence seemed restored, and that worried Maya. "Your Honor, this evidence directly challenges the plaintiff's claims of financial hardship and speaks to her credibility." He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Patterson opened it, his expression neutral as he examined the contents. "Miss Brooks," the judge said, "have you had the opportunity to review this evidence?" "No, Your Honor." Maya replied, "This is the first time we're seeing it very well." The judge said, "You'll have the chance to respond after Mr. Cole presents his case." Maya braced herself as Mr. Cole addressed the court. "Your Honor, these are signed affidavits from multiple witnesses who claim to have seen Miss Carter engaging in unreported business activities, including operating a cash and daycare service from her apartment." Gas rippled through the courtroom. Teresa's face went white, and she turned to Maya, shaking her head. "That's not true," she whispered. "I don't know what they're talking about." Maya nodded, her mind already working to counter the claim. "Don't worry," she whispered back. "WEC handle this." Mr. Cole continued presenting the affidavit and photos that purported to show parents dropping off children at Teresa's apartment. The defense argued that this income undermined her claims of financial hardship and raised questions about her credibility. When it was Maya's turn to cross-examine, she approached the bench with her usual calm. "Your Honor, may I examine these affidavits?" The judge nodded, and the bailiff handed her copies of the documents. Maya scanned them quickly, noting discrepancies in the signatures and the vague language used by the witnesses. "Mr. Cole," she began, "can you confirm the identities of these witnesses and whether they've been deposed?" Mr. Cole hesitated. "They have not been deposed yet, but their affidavits are signed and notarized." Maya smiled faintly. "Notarized does not equal credible without depositions. We have no way of verifying the authenticity of these claims." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that these witnesses be made available for depositions before this evidence is admitted." The judge nodded. "That's a reasonable request. Mr. Cole arranged for your witnesses is to be deposed by the end of the week. Until then, this evidence will not be considered." After the hearing, Maya and Teresa left the courthouse, the weight of the new allegations hanging over them as they walked to the car. Teresa finally broke down. "Maya, what if they believe this?" she said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even know these people. How can I prove they're lying?" Maya hugged her tightly. "We'll prove it. Teresa, I promise this is just another one of their games, and we're going to expose it." That evening, Aaron called with an update. "Maya, I found something interesting. One of the witnesses who signed those affidavits, she's connected to a company that has ties to Reynolds Properties." Maya's eyes narrowed. "You mean she's on his payroll, not directly?" Aaron clarified, but Sheck worked for a property management firm that oversees some of his buildings. "It's enough to raise questions about her impartiality." Maya nodded, a plan forming in her mind. "That's exactly what we need." "Can you gather more details already on it?" Aaron said, "and get this. 2 of the other witnesses have connections to Harmony Solutions. I'm sending you everything." Now Maya smiled for the first time all day. "Aaron, you're a lifesaver." The next morning, Maya prepared her deposition strategy. When the witnesses were called in, she systematically dismantled their credibility. She presented Aaron findings showing their ties to Reynolds and questioning their motivations for coming forward. One witness, visibly nervous, admitted under pressure that she had been paid to sign the affidavit. Another claimed to have no knowledge of the allegations, saying she had been told she was signing a petition about tenant rights. By the end of the depositions, it was clear that the new evidence was yet another fabrication. Maya presented her findings to Judge Patterson, who was visibly unimpressed with the defense's tactics. Mr. Cole, the judge said sternly, "This court has had enough of these baseless distractions. The evidence you presented is inadmissible, and I'm considering sanctions against your client for attempting to mislead this court." Maya and Teresa exchanged relieved glances, but the victory was bittersweet. The length Reynolds team was willing to go made it clear that they weren't done fighting yet. As the hearing adjourned, MAA stepped outside into the crisp air, her resolve stronger than ever. But as she approached her car, a man in a dark suit stepped out of the shadows. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone. A word of advice, back off. You don't know who you're dealing with." MA stared at him, her pulse quickening, but her voice didn't waver. "If that's a threat, you'll need to do better, because I'm not going anywhere." The man in the dark suit gave Maya a chilling smile. His eyes narrowing. "Suit yourself," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded parking lot. Teresa, who had just exited the courthouse, hurried over to Maya. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Maya replied, her eyes scanning the area. "But it's clear Reynolds' team isn't just playing dirty. They're escalating." Teresa's face was pale. "Maya, this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should—" "No," Maya interrupted firmly. "That's exactly what they want. If we back down now, they win, and they'll keep doing this to other people." Teresa nodded reluctantly, but the fear in her eyes remained that evening. NOIA sat at her desk, replaying the encounter in her mind. The man's tone, his confident stride, and the vague but pointed threat, it all felt calculated. She called Aaron, hoping he could shed some light on the situation. "Hey, Maya." Aaron answered, "What's up?" She recounted the parking lot incident, describing the man in detail. "I don't know who he is, but he's clearly connected to Reynolds or his team. Can you look into anyone new they might have hired Aaron's side? It's possible they've brought in private investigators or consultants." "I'll dig around and see what I can find." "Thanks, Aaron," Maya said, "and let me know if anything looks off. I've got a feeling this isn't over." The next morning, Maya arrived at the courthouse early, determined to maintain control of the case. To her surprise, Judge Patterson called her into chambers before the session began. "Miss Brooks," he said, his expression unusually grave, "I've received a letter from Mr. Reynolds' attorney requesting to delay the proceedings, indefinitely, citing his client legal troubles and inability to participate." M.A. brow furrowed. "Your Honor, this is another stalling tactic. The defense has repeatedly tried to derail this case. Granting them an indefinite delay would set a dangerous precedent." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I agree that the request is suspect, but the court must balance fairness with efficiency. Do you have a proposal for how we should proceed?" Maya took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I request that the case move forward without further delays. If Mr. Reynolds is unavailable, his legal team can represent him based on the evidence already submitted." Judge Patterson leaned back in his chair, considering her words very well. "I'll deny the defense's request for an indefinite delay and set a final hearing date. Be prepared to present closing arguments next week." The announcement sent shockwaves through the courtroom. When the session resumed, Mr. Cole, clearly unprepared for this development, scrambled to object. But the judge held firm. "This case has dragged on long enough," Judge Patterson declared. "Both sides will present closing arguments next week, and this court will issue a ruling." After court adjourned, Teresa turned to Maya, her voice filled with a mix of relief and anxiety. "So this is it? It's almost over." Maya nodded. "Almost, but we need to make sure our closing argument is airtight. This is our chance to seal the deal." That evening, Aaron called with an update. "Maya, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice placed with urgency. "I found out who that guy in the parking lot was. His name is Lucas Harper, and he's a private investigator with a reputation for doing questionable work." Questionable? How Maya asked, her stomach tightening. Harassment, intimidation, planting evidence, you name it. He's been linked to several high-profile cases where the opposition suddenly dropped out after his involvement. Maya exhaled sharply. "So they're trying to scare us into quitting?" "Exactly," Aaron said. "But here's the kicker. Harper is tied to another one of Reynolds' shell companies. They're paying him directly." Maya's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly the kind of pattern we need to show the judge. Can you send me everything you have on Harper? Already on its way." Aaron replied. Just be careful, Maya. This guy doesn't play by the rules the next day. Maya incorporated Aon's findings into her case file. She knew presenting this information in could be risky. Harper's presence wasn't directly tied to the case, but it painted a clear picture of Reynolds' tactics and lack of credibility as she worked. Teresa called, her voice panicked. Maya, something's wrong. A man came to my apartment today asking questions about you. What did he ask? Maya asked, her pulse quickening, things like how we met, why I trusted you, and if I thought you were capable of handling the case. He said he was a reporter, but something about him didn't feel right. Maya clenched her jaw. That's Harper. They're trying to dig up dirt on me now. Don't answer any more of his questions and let me know if he comes back, okay? Teresa said, her voice shaking. But Maya, this is getting scarier every day. What if they hurt someone? They won't, Maya said firmly. We're not going to let them intimidate us. The following week, the courtroom was packed as Maya and Mr. Cole prepared to deliver their closing arguments. The tension in the air was palpable, with reporters and spectators eager to see how the case would conclude. Mr. Cole went first, painting Reynolds as a misunderstood landlord who had been unfairly targeted. His argument was filled with vague statements and emotional appeals, but it lacked substance. When it was Maya's turn, she stood confidently, her voice steady and clear. Your Honor, this case has always been about one thing. Justice. The evidence presented over the course of this trial has exposed a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and exploitation by Mr. Reynolds and his team. From fabricated financial records to witness intimidation, their tactics speak volumes about their credibility or lack thereof. She paused, letting her words sink in. Teresa Carter is a hardworking mother who has done nothing but fight for her right to live in peace. She deserves justice, and today this court has the opportunity to deliver it. Maya turned to her seat, her heart pounding as she sat beside Teresa. The judge announced that he would issue a ruling in 3 days, and the courtroom slowly emptied as Maya and Teresa walked to the parking lot. A dark figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Harper. You really don't know when to quit, do you? He said, his tone laced with menace. You're playing a dangerous game, kid. Maya stopped, standing tall despite the fear that rippled through her. The only dangerous game here is the one you're playing, and you've already lost. Harper smirked. We'll see about that. Before Maya could respond, headlights swept across the parking lot and a black SUV pulled up. Harper turned and disappeared into the vehicle, leaving Maya and Teresa standing in the cold, silent night. 3 days later, the courtroom was packed again as Judge Patterson prepared to deliver his ruling. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly together. Teresa sat beside her, holding her breath. The judge cleared his throat after reviewing all evidence and testimony presented in this case. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Teresa Carter. The room erupted into applause and cheers, but the judge raised his hand for silence. Furthermore, this court will refer Mr. Reynolds and his legal team for investigation into possible perjury, evidence tampering, and other misconduct. Tears streamed down Teresa's face as she hugged Maya. We did it, she whispered. You did it. Maya smiled, her relief and pride mingling. But as she looked across the room and saw Mr. Cole hurriedly packing his briefcase, she knew one thing for certain: this victory was just the beginning of her fight for justice. The Katum victory was monumental, but Maya knew the fight wasn't truly over as Teresa hugged her. The relief was palpable, but a lingering sense of unease tugged at the edges of Maya's thoughts. Reynolds' arrest and the judge's ruling were victories, but they were only part of the battle. The broader system that allowed landlords like Reynolds to exploit tenants still loomed large that evening as Maya returned home. Her grandmother Clara was waiting with open arms. You were incredible, Maya, Clara said, pulling her into a hug. I'm so proud of you. Maya smiled, the warmth of her grandmother's embrace momentarily easing the weight on her shoulders. Thanks, Grandma, but I think this is just the start. There are so many others like Teresa who don't have the resources to fight back. Clara nodded, her face thoughtful. You've been given a gift, Maya. Maybe it's time to think about how you can use it to help more people. The next morning, Maya received a call from a local journalist, Maya Brooks. The voice on the other end said, I'm Tyler Jackson with the Tribune. I'd love to do a feature on you. Highlight your work on the Reynolds case and what it means for tenant WRS. Maya hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight and didn't particularly enjoy the attention, but she realized that sharing the story could inspire others to stand up for themselves. Okay, she said cautiously, but only if the focus stays on the case and the impact on tenants like Teresa. Absolutely, Tyler agreed. Leighton scheduled an interview later that week. The article went live, and it was more than Maya expected. The headline read, Tina Turn takes down corrupt landlord sparks, hope for tenants everywhere. It detailed the trial, the tactics Reynolds had used, and Maya's unrelenting fight for justice. The response was overwhelming. Maya received dozens of emails and messages from people across the country, many sharing their own stories of housing and justice. One email in particular stood out. Dear Miss Brooks, my name is Laura Gonzalez. I've been fighting a similar battle with my landlord for over a year. Your story gave me the courage to keep going. I was wondering if you'd be willing to advise me on my case. I can't afford a lawyer, but I could really use your help. Ma stared at the email, her mind racing. She wanted to help, but she was just one person. How could she take on more cases while still keeping up with her studies and personal life, Grandma? She said later that evening, people are asking for my help. I want to do more. But I don't know how. Clara sat beside her, her expression wise and calm. You don't have to do it alone, Maya. There are people out there who share your passion. Maybe it's time to build something bigger. Maya spent the next few weeks brainstorming ways to expand her impact. She reached out to local lawyers, community activists, and nonprofit organizations focused on housing rights. Slowly but surely, a plan began to take shape, a grassroots initiative that would provide free legal aid to tenants facing eviction and exploitation. She called it the Justice Collective. Aaron jumped on board immediately, offering to handle the tech side of things. We'll set up a website, social media, everything, he said excitedly. This could really blow up. Teresa volunteered as well, eager to give back after everything she'd been through. You saved me, Maya. She said the least I can do is help you save others. Meanwhile, the fallout from Reynolds' arrest continued. News reports revealed that he was facing additional charges, including tax evasion and racketeering. Several of his properties were seized by the authorities, and tenants who had been wrongfully evicted began to speak out. But not everyone was happy about Maya's growing influence. One evening, as she worked late at the new Justice Collective office, a small donated space in a community center, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Miss Brooks. The voice on the other end said, low and menacing, you think you've won, but you don't understand how deep this goes. Walk away while you still can. Maya's grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? The caller chuckled. Darkly, let's just say I'm someone who knows how to make problems disappear. Consider this your last warning. The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, her heart pounding. She immediately called Aaron and told him about the threat. That's insane. Aaron said, we need to report this to the police. Maya hesitated and said, what? That some anonymous caller told me to stop helping people without proof. They won't do anything. Still, Aaron insisted, you shouldn't take this lightly. You're getting under someone's skin, and they're scared of what you're building. Maya took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Then I must be doing something right. As the Justice Collective gained traction, more stories came to light. Families who had been forced out of their homes, landlords who manipulated leases, and tenants who felt powerless. The movement began to grow, with volunteers stepping up to support the cause. But the threats didn't stop. Maya started noticing strange cars parked near her house. And once she found a threatening note taped to her door. Quit while you can. One evening as she was leaving the office, she spotted Lucas Harper waiting outside. He leaned casually against a lamppost, his smirk as infuriating as ever. You've made quite a name for yourself, he said as she approached. But you're poking at things that don't like to be poked. Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. I'm not afraid of you. Harper chuckled. Maybe you should be people like me. We don't lose, neither do I. Maya shot back, brushing past him. The threats only fueled her determination. By the end of the year, the Justice Collective had helped dozens of families avoid eviction and exposed several unethical landlords. Maya's story continued to spread, inspiring others to fight back against injustice. But Maya knew the fight wasn't over. The deeper she dug, the more corruption she uncovered. And as the movement grew, so did the enemies she made. Still, she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The Justice Collective's growth was unprecedented. In less than a year, Maya and her team had transformed a small initiative into a powerful force, uncovering systemic corruption in housing laws and holding landlords accountable. Yet with every victory, the threats against Maya escalated. Anonymous letters, late-night phone calls, and the ever-present shadow of Lucas Harper reminded her that she was fighting a battle that stretched far beyond her initial case. One evening, after wrapping up a seminar at a local community center, Maya received an urgent call from Aaron. Maya. "We've got a problem," Aaron said, his voice tense. "I've been tracking some unusual activity tied to Reynolds' old network. There's a massive real estate deal happening tomorrow. It involves one of his shell companies, Harmony Solutions, and a group of investors with a shady track record." Maya frowned. "What's the deal? They're planning to buy up a block of low-income housing, evict everyone, and flip it into luxury condos. It's a textbook gentrification scheme, and they're using Reynolds' playbook. If this goes through, dozens of families will be displaced." Maya's stomach twisted. "Do we have enough evidence to stop it?" "Not yet," Aaron admitted, "but I found out where the signing is happening. If we can disrupt the meeting and expose their plans, we might be able to stop it." The next morning, Maya, Aaron, and Teresa arrived at the downtown office building where the meeting was scheduled to take place, armed with documents Aaron had uncovered. They were ready to confront the investors and reveal the truth as they entered the building. Maya spotted Lucas Harper leaning against a wall near the elevator. He smirked when he saw her. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said, "but you're way out of your league this time." Maya stepped closer, her voice cold. Maybe you and your friends are finally about to lose." Harper chuckled. "Good luck, you'll need it." Maya ignored him and headed to the conference room where the deal was set to be signed. Through the glass walls, she could see a group of men in suits gathered around a table, documents spread out before four of them. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room fell silent as the investors turned to look at her. "Can we help you?" one of them asked, his tone laced with irritation. Maya held up a folder. "I'm here to stop you from destroying people's lives." The men exchanged amused glances, but Maya pressed on. She placed copies of Aaron's findings on the table and began explaining how the deal relied on fraudulent practices as she spoke. "Their mercs faded. This deal isn't just unethical, it's illegal," Maya said. "And if you move forward with it, we'll make sure the world knows exactly what you're doing." The tension in the room was thick. One of the investors, clearly rattled, muttered, "We need to discuss this privately." Another, less shaken, leaned forward. "You have no authority here, kid. Get out before we call security." Maya stood her ground. "You can call security if you want, but the evidence is already on its way to the media and the Attorney General's office." "This meeting is over." For a moment, no one moved. Then, one of the older investors sighed and stood up. "She's right, we can't take this risk. We're pulling out." The others followed suit, some grumbling, others glaring at Maya as they filed out of the room. Lucas Harper appeared in the doorway, watching with a mixture of annoyance and admiration. "You really don't quit," he said. Maya turned to him, her voice steady. "Not when people's lives are at stake?" Harper's smirk faltered for the first time. He gave her a small nod, almost respectful, before walking away. The story of Maya's showdown at the investor meeting spread quickly, solidifying her reputation as a fearless advocate for justice. The Justice Collective received an outpouring of support, with donations and volunteers flooding in the block of housing Maya had saved became a symbol of hope, and tenants began organizing their own efforts to protect their rights. But Maya knew the fight was far from over. She had learned that the system was deeply flawed, and for every landlord like Reynolds or investor scheme she exposed, there were more waiting in the shadows. One evening, as she sat with Clara and Teresa, Maya reflected on the journey so far. "It feels like we're just scratching the surface." She said, "There's so much more to do." Clara smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You've already made a difference, Maya, and you're inspiring others to stand up too. That's how real change begins." Teresa nodded. "You gave me my life back. You're doing more than just fighting cases. You're giving people hope." Maya smiled, a sense of purpose washing over her. "Then I guess we keep going." Years later, Maya Brooks would go on to become a renowned attorney and activist, leading a nationwide movement for tenant rights and housing reform. The Justice Collective expanded into a powerful organization, helping thousands of families and rewriting laws to protect the vulnerable. And though the threats never fully disappeared, Maya never wavered. She had learned that the fight for justice was never easy, but it was always worth it, because for every son like Teresa Carter who found their voice, the world became a little brighter. Maya's story became a beacon, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person could make a difference, and that the fight for justice was always worth fighting.